Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. Thank you all for joining our 2020 first ever virtual broker symposium, Western Gable Valley Realtors. I'm Pauline Lam from Cotai Realty, your 2020 co-chair education committee. I would like to thank Mindy Ye, 2020 president, Lin Chao, 2020 vice president, and 2010 past president, Mr. Mel Wang, 2014 past president, education committee team, and all of you to make this meeting possible. A few housekeeping tips. All participants will be muted. Should you have any questions, please enter it into the chat box. Speaker will answer it during each Q&A section. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, Western Gable Valley Realtors. Today, we have the great honor to invite our special speakers, Mr. Sanjay Wagle from C.A.R., Ms. Amy Yuwula Zuniga, and Mr. Carter from CRMLS, and our attorney, Jim Klinkert, to give us the speech. Now, I would like to have our Mr. Mel Wang to introduce you our first speaker from C.A.R. Mel, take it away.
Thank you, Miss Pauline. Good to hear from you and see you. At this time, I have the honor of presenting Mr. Sanjay Wagle. He is the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the California Association of Realtors. Sanjay is the association chief lobbyist and supervises the policy and political work of the Government Affairs Department. The Government Affairs team includes advocates who work to advance the policy and political goals of the association. Sanjay has been with the California Association of Realtors since 2003. However, he started his career there as an attorney in C.A.R. Member Legal Services Department in Los Angeles before joining the Governmental Affairs team in Sacramento in 2016. Sanjay received his law degree from the University of Southern California, USC, yay, and an MA from UCLA and BA from the University of Chicago. So at this time, it is my honor to present Mr. Sanjay Wagle. Take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So today what I'm going to do is, as you know, the legislative session is over. What I'm going to just basically do is talk a bit about the election, the initiatives, and some of the challenges we're expecting to see next year. One thing I want to just quickly do is go over the political environment that we are dealing with in Sacramento. And let me just also, before I start that, make it very clear, I'll be talking about Republicans, Democrats, the way the legislature looks, etc. Please note that's done purely for sort of explanatory purposes. C.A.R. is a bipartisan organization. We support we support basically candidates and policies that advance the interest of real estate and home ownership in the state of California, regardless of party. Due to facts, which I'm going to be talking about very shortly, we generally, when we do sponsored bills, which are bills that we promote or bills that we support, it tends to be Democratic authors just because they overwhelmingly dominate the state. But my discussions are not meant to indicate any partisan preference. We are, again, a bipartisan group. The Realtor Party is kind of what we stand for. Currently in California, we are a very Democratic state. So as I think all of you know, all the executive offices, governor, secretary of state are all held by Democrats. And the Assembly and Senate have what are called supermajorities of Democrats. What that means is they have more than 2/3 membership in both houses. What that means is effectively if the Democratic caucus, all the members hold together, they could pass any kind of legislation they want, including tax increases, which you need a 2/3 for. Of course, the governor would have to sign any of those, but it just means that there is the power to do so, even if all Republicans were to vote no. The best way to illustrate the dominance of the party on the state level is the Assembly, which currently has 61 Democrats and 17 Republicans, and one independent who used to be a Republican. In the Senate, it's 29 Democrats and 11 Republicans. So as you can see, it's a very dominating presence. And a good way to also illustrate this is the vast majority of bills are actually majority vote bills. Costa-Hawkins, the bill that restricts the ability of locals to go sort of too crazy with their rent control ordinances, is a majority vote bill. So in theory, that could be done with just 41 votes, and 20 members could go home and vote no. They could go home to their areas and say, I stood up to the leadership and voted no, but they could still comfortably pass that. That's why sometimes when you see a tough vote and it looks like 41 and you go, oh, wow, that barely passed. Well, it might be, it was a tough vote, so they gave their moderates and others a way to say no. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was that way necessarily, like, oh, it barely passed. So that's our situation right now in Sacramento, which most business groups such as ours, our main focus is supporting and promoting moderate candidates of either party, because basically those people who will advance home ownership. Unlike a lot of business groups, since our issues straddle both the Democratic and Republican sides, we actually are able to be truly bipartisan, and we have issues that cross-cut, unlike some groups who it's much harder, I think, working with Democrats than it is for us. So that's the situation in Sacramento. We are currently, as you know, in the middle of an election, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now about the election, partly because there is unprecedented turnout. The state of California is seeing, it's just unprecedented. Now, will that taper off in the next couple of days, or will it be a different kind of turnout? Because breaking with history, Republican and more conservative voters seem to be voting late, whereas historically they used to vote first. But everything is indicating that California actually might even get bluer, meaning more Democratic. So we might even have more Democratic. It seems hard to believe that there still is room, but there actually might be more Democrats elected to the Senate and to the the Assembly in California. So it's just a possibility. The main three initiatives, I'm going to quickly, and I'm sorry, real quick, as far as next year, what are we looking at? What are going to be the big challenges for us? The big challenges, of course, are going to continue to be in terms of bills we have to sort of oppose or fight or try to secure amendments, will be rent. There's going to be continued attempts to have either eviction moratoriums, rent for, delays in rent being owed, et cetera. As you might know, in California, we don't think of it as much, but there is actually a federal moratorium on evictions as well, which is also going on. One thing I think a lot of people are hoping for, whether this comes true or not, is some sort of federal, and NAR is trying this, which would give federal assistance to basically to landlords. It would be to help help small landlords when the tenants cannot pay, where both the feds and the state don't want to really evict everybody because of the potential health crisis that could result from that. But they recognize that small landlords could go under if they can't get paid, right? I mean, even if it's one thing for these mega companies that might be able, like Blackstone, that might be able to sort of, balance it out while they'll take a hit, they can sort of, take the good with the bad and work out how their numbers will go. But for small landlords, if you're not getting rent, you can't do upkeep. California, nothing changes on the laws for if your water heater goes down or there's an insulation problem or the roof starts to leak. All of those things are still mandates for the landlord to do. So that is a big concern and a big problem. That's something which we will have to address in any state legislation, as well as how do we keep the small landlords afloat in this environment. That really is something we also as an organization are the ones pushing for the most. The Apartment Association does as well, but especially us, because again, some of the large landowners, that's not as much their concern. They have sometimes a different set of issues. But we are hopeful NAR is trying to actually get legislation. They currently are actually getting a more favorable response, kind of strangely to me, from Democrats for that type of legislation on the national level that would, again, assist small landlords when the tenants cannot pay. But we're just gonna have to see what happens. The other issue is revenue. We're expecting, because as you probably know, the state, unlike the federal government, cannot run deficits. And the COVID crisis has severely impacted California's budget. So aside from its normal budgetary issues, there was a surplus this year, but that's easily eaten up by the decline in revenue. So it's very possible we are probably going to have to. C.A.R. generally does not take positions on general taxes. We are specifically real estate focused, so we will be watching for any taxes that impact real estate or real estate transactions. Ones that I'm concerned about would be any type of service tax, as well as some of the unfortunate proposals we're seeing in some of the larger cities, especially in the Bay Area, vacant land taxes, transfer taxes on higher end properties, meaning increased ones. Those kind of things we're seeing in the Bay Area. We're kind of afraid of those maybe spreading. And those would of course have really negative effects. But again, we generally do not weigh in on if they want to just raise taxes on everybody or on everything. There are three main initiatives. Hopefully you are all aware of Prop 19, which is C.A.R.'s co-sponsored initiative with the California Professional Firefighters. As you know, that is an initiative that would allow for portability of property tax basis for seniors. As I said, it's always odd for me to say seniors for people who are just 55 and above, but it would allow that senior to transfer their property tax basis 3 times in the course of their life beyond the age of 55, 3 times to a property of any value anywhere in the state. Anticipated based on projections that would result in a significant increase in transactions, as a lot of senior people might elect to move who are being held back by their property tax issues. Post-COVID, we've also been seeing a lot of interest in this. We've been noticing 3, and in some ways contradictory trends, which are moving away from density or moving to closer to better healthcare or to families, to their own family members. So we've been seeing some of that desire to move, and we think this will actually might even accelerate some of that. In addition, those who are victims of natural disasters or severely disabled are able to make use of this. And obviously the state's kind of been on fire, and you'll notice our advertising has been heavily focused on that. So that's where 19 is. There's also a change to the intergenerational transfer law, which will have it that the intergenerational transfer, which allows the property tax basis of the parents to go to the child, will only apply if the child lives in the property. It would not apply if the child elects to make it a rental property. So that's 19. Current polling shows that is likely to pass. There's a lot of anxiety though in the political world, mainly because of all these new voters. There's a lot of people who've not voted before or have never been that active, especially on young voters. And so there's just concern, like, because the polling, it's not really clear with these. And sometimes when they poll people after they voted and say, well, how did you vote on these initiatives? Like the before all looks pretty good. And then after, people sometimes just don't remember how they voted, which is understandable, right? I mean, you don't necessarily remember how you voted on the dialysis one, right? These are very important to us, so we think of them. But for a lot of other voters, they're just something they took on their, maybe Democratic Party sheet and vote on yes on 19, yet no, So hopefully we're cautiously optimistic that 19 will pass. It's looking pretty good, but it could be close only because, again, there's uncertainty. Prop 15 is the one C.A.R. opposes. We oppose Proposition 15, which would create a split roll. I always feel funny explaining Prop 13 to realtors because I think you all understand it. But Proposition 13, as you know, if you buy a piece of property in the state of California while you own it, the most it could go up every year is 2%. It is never reassessed to market value while you own it. Proposition 15 would change that. It would create what's called a split roll. That would make commercial and industrial property reassessed to market value. All residential property would be excluded from reassessment. That includes very large developments, skyscrapers, whatever, as long as it's residential development or agricultural land. If it's mixed use, the commercial portion would be reassessed. There's an extremely limited exemption if a property owner owns less than $3 million worth of commercial land and buildings. But that to me is a very limited exemption and kind of convoluted. I really think it was just thrown in there so that they can say, oh, well, small people are not going to be affected. But on the coast, as you all know, 3 million is not, it's going to be very easy to get over that threshold. What we have right now is, so that would have those are significant changes. Why is this on the ballot? Money. The state of the revenue generated by this is likely to be between $6.5 and $11.5 billion. That's net of extremely high costs for assessments. Just think about this. The assessors will have to go, and that's why they oppose this, and reevaluate every commercial property in the state of California, basically, to figure out its value, and then figure out the tax. And then you have a right to appeal. So a lot of those are going to be appealed. If somebody's trying to claim, oh, I own under 3 million, they're going to have to kind of make sure that that's it. The implementation costs are going to be likely to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But even net of that, this will generate billions. The main promoters of this are the California teachers, because 40% goes to education, 60% will go to cities, counties, and special districts. The third, I haven't checked very recently, but the last time I checked in terms of funding, the third biggest funder is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. That sounds familiar. That is, of course, the Facebook's public policy wing. So I jokingly say, when you use Facebook, WhatsApp, or Instagram, you have helped fund Prop 15. But yeah, so they curiously support that. The opposed arguments to Prop 15, I think, are fairly self-evident, which are either way, if you have a triple net lease, the impact on small business is going to be severe, right? Because the landlords are going to pass on to their tenants the increased property tax. Even if it's not a full pass on, it's going to increase rents very likely, creating real problems for small business in the state of California. Also, what if you don't have a triple net lease, which we actually have been finding there's a lot of places, small owners, as well as small industrial properties where they have longer term leases and want certainty, they have non-triple net leases. That just kind of, to me, shifts the economic risk to the owner, who may not be able to, if they, depending on the amount of debt they have or their ability to service the property, they may not be able to afford to keep their property as a result of Proposition 15. Also, getting into the complexity of value, Proposition 15 itself will affect the value of all this commercial property. So this is a very problematic initiative in a lot of ways. Part of the impact, again, the concerns on ethnic small business, you have some people you think would not normally be opposed to this who are, such as Latinos Vote, the NAACP, all ethnic chambers of commerce, various community groups as well, because of the potential effect on small business. This could also make, for communities in a state where we have a real residential housing crisis, commercial development more attractive, right? Because you can reassess commercial development now to every time if it goes up in value, which makes it a stronger source of revenue for local government. It is opposed by us, NAACP, United Latinos Vote, the California Business Roundtable, and the California Business Properties, as well as a number of local community groups as well. Everybody felt pretty good that there's no way this thing could pass. We all actually now in the political world have a lot of anxiety, those of us who oppose this, that this very well might pass. In my opinion, if the results are as bad as they potentially could be, perhaps we'll see an effort to repeal this, or to reverse it if it goes forward. But right now, this very well could pass. Yeah, it's very concerning. Proposition 21 is something C.A.R. also opposes. This would not repeal the Costa-Hawkins law. The Costa-Hawkins law, as you might be aware, limits, it doesn't say you can't have rent control. It just says a local government can only, there's certain limits on what they can do in terms of rent control. The most important part of this, and why C.A.R. and apartment groups strongly oppose this, is it would bring back vacancy control. All rent control laws in the state of California right now, once a property becomes vacant, the landlord has to be allowed to bring it up to market rent. This would say, no, the landlord could potentially increase it over 15% over 3 years, but that's it. That might seem like a lot, but for those of you who might be familiar with the rent control areas, a lot of tenants live there a very long time. So at the time it becomes vacant, that just a 15% increase in the rental value of that unit will not capture anywhere close to market in some cases. And so you've got a whole cascading set of problems that comes from that in terms of upkeep of the property, the ability to maintain property, the desirability of renting out property as well. This is opposed by C.A.R., the California Apartment Association, and also, despite the Democratic Party supporting it, Gavin Newsom, the governor, opposes it for exactly, in many ways, the same reasons we do, which it will also discourage the development of affordable housing and might actually reduce the amount of people who want to keep rentals, right? I mean, some people will just figure, I'm done. The advertising on this one, I think, has actually been pretty good because it recognizes the fact that in California, we have a statewide rent cap law, right? So we've already got something and that just passed, so why are we doing this now? And so I think that advertising is actually resonating. This is not polling as well. So we're hoping that this one of the three, I feel, I hate making predictions, but I really do feel this one is going to go down. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about that. The main supporter of this is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which was also behind Prop 10. As far as all the other initiatives, C.A.R. has taken a formal a position that they are not considered real estate related. So feel free to vote as you wish on everything else. I do get questions about the Uber Lyft one because that concerns independent contractor status. That does not affect our independent contractor status, which is actually heavily protected, that historic status, by AB 5. This would simply carve out an exemption for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash type drivers, but it does not affect us. So again, it's however you choose to go. And that is my presentation. I am happy to take any questions, if there are any. And also, if you later, and I'll put it in the box, if you don't have any questions right now, but might later, feel free to just email me.
All right, Mr. Sanjay Wagle, thank you for this very informative and timely presentation. I still see nothing in the chat box for you.
Okay.
So with this, thank you very much. And I'll pass this on to Mindy to
All right, thank you very much.
introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Mel. I was talking to myself. I forgot to unmute. Good morning, WSGVR members and family. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Mr. Art Carter. Mr. Art Carter is CEO of California Regional Multiple Listing Services, the national largest and most recognized subscriber-based multiple listing service called MLS. Mr. Carter oversees strategic directions of the Chino Hills-based company with more than 84,000 members, agents from 34 associations, 3 board of realtors, and 1 MLS, 1 CRMLS, connected California real estate professionals of millions of property listed across the state. Mr. Carter currently serves as chair of real estate standard organization called RESO and is a strategic manager of board of directors of Midwest Real Estate called MRED. He was named one of the Inman most influential real estate leaders in 2016 and 2017. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Art Carter. Hi, Art. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy, for everyone having me here today. Okay, let's launch into the presentation here. And I want to thank everyone once again for the opportunity to present here to you guys today. And as such, I'm going to go walk through my presentation with you. So lots of stuff going on at CRMLS, lots of stuff going on at West San Gabriel, and basically want to walk you through some of the things that we're seeing out of the group here at West San Gabriel, and give you guys a general idea of what it is that is going on within the CRMLS system. So you guys can see, are the slides moving forward? Okay, perfect. Let me pop into where I can see those. So we're going to take a look at West San Gabriel at a glance and give you guys kind of some overviews of what we're seeing along the lines of general market statistics. And within those general market statistics, talk a little bit about where we see things going. Basically, the lowest number of sales closed in a month within the West San Gabriel footprint was by far at the height of the pandemic in May of 2020. Only 80 sales closed that month. In September 2020, the number of closed sales rebounded to 2015. Hopefully that's recognizing what you guys are seeing in the marketplace. You did have that, that drop from February to April as well. And new listings did expand pretty significantly during that time frame and from May to September as well. So because we're seeing a lot of activity, I will tell you across the CRMLS footprint, it has been kind of surprising, head shakingly so that in some of the biggest economic downturns, the marketplace within the CRMLS platform has been the strongest that we've seen in the 15 years that I've been at CRMLS. So I know you guys are definitely seeing that in your local marketplace as well. And so the other thing that you guys are taking a look at is the median sales price. We did a look at it between August and September. There's some significant jumps even in the 1 month. Your median days on market in the case of a year went from 23 average days on market down to 15. Now recognize that most economists will tell you on the sales side that a healthy marketplace will settle in the 30 days on market range. And you guys are literally sitting there at half that level. And you know, we're seeing anecdotally a lot of instructions about multiple offers on properties, up to 35 to 40 on each property. And it's becoming very, very increasingly hard, especially on the listing side, to keep all of those things going for your client base. So that hopefully, you know, I'll open it up to questions at the end. If you guys have any specific questions on that, I've got some more deeper dives into the data that I can provide you guys as well. As usual with any presentation that I do, I will provide the slides out to Albert and his team. So if you guys want to take a look at them, you guys will have that capability as well. So let's talk a little bit about our customer care and CC, or the compliance milestones when it comes to you. I think it's important for you as brokerages to kind of know where things are going with your agents and what's going on within the marketplace. So let's take a look at the first slide here, which is the customer care call statistics. The vast majority, the reason why I show this to you guys is that it's important for you to understand that we're there for you from a training standpoint. And any of these items that you guys see as far as what's generating phone calls will be beneficial for you is on the brokerage side to set up trainings within your office. So Amy Ulloa is on the call as well. And Amy is my Director of Broker Resources, and she can absolutely assist you guys. Albert can direct any phone calls over to her, assist each and every one of you in any concerns or demands for training that you guys have. One of the things that was kind of surprising to me, and that 13% of the total phone calls that came in to our customer care call center came from your West San Gabriel members. So you guys account for about 3 or 4% of our total membership. So you guys are actively calling us on a regular basis. What that kind of tells me is that we need to get out and do some training for you and your staff, or you and your agents. So I'll put that out there again. Once again, if you'll put people in front of us, we'll put a trainer in front of you. We're virtual and will be virtual at least through the first part of 2021. But my staff is very good at providing those Zoom classes for you and for your offices. So let's talk a little bit about my next slide, which is the matrix related customer care calls. Primarily a lot of issues with our ad edit and really just how to search. 70% of our phone calls, as I'm going to reiterate this once again, are training in nature. So please reach out to us. We'd love to get out in front of your agents and have an opportunity to talk to them about the matrix system and about our additional products as well. It will only help your agents in a very practical sense of the word to make sure that they understand what it is that they're doing within the system. So let's talk a little bit about the compliance piece of it. I know everybody's favorite subject. I know it generates more phone calls to me than anything else that we do. So let's talk about the top 5 violations. And I'm just gonna pop these up on the screen. I don't know if all of that is popping up there for you guys. Failure to correct any violation is always one of our bigger pieces. And so it's something that we spend a lot of time with. We also have use of media without prior authorization. Recognize that you can't pull listing content off of another listing, including the photos, and use it on your new listing. You have to have written approval by the copyright owner, which is the person who took the photo, to upload any listing within the multiple listing service. So I think it's very important for us to communicate that to you guys. Recognize, one of the things we get complaints about quite a bit is art. You're fined for a copyright violation is $2,500. And you guys have heard me say this before. The reason why it's so high is because it's such a serious issue. And this use of media without prior authorization really keys into that. Why is it such a serious issue? Recognize that federal law allows for upwards of $750 for every violation of a copyright. And recognize that when you input a listing into the multiple listing service, you shoot that listing out via IDX and through all of the third-party portals that you guys have access to. There's close to 27,000 websites that your listing is being displayed on when you enter it into the multiple listing service. Somebody do the quick math for me. That 25,000, 27,000 times 750 is a huge liability for you and for the membership of CRMLS as a whole. So it is something we take very seriously. Give you a little bit of background information about that. Failure to input or verify accurate listing information, mandatory submission of photography or rendering. It still amazes me that this is a top 5 item, and it's been a top 5 item 23 years I've been working in MLS. So it's important. We did change those rules to where it's now down to 2 business days to get your photos into the multiple listing service from the 5 that it used to be. But recognize it is important. There is a huge variation in between listings that have photos and listings that don't have photos and how much they're viewed on the internet. So we're doing you a favor here, especially on the brokerage side. Misuse of public records, wide variety of issues underlying that as well. We do have full compliance classes for you guys to go through, and I'd highly recommend that you'd have us come out and do those classes for you as well. So let's talk a little bit about how many cases were processed within West San Gabriel's footprint, we had 534 cases that were delivered to us. So complaints about listings, complaints about issues that violate the multiple listing service rules. We sent 46 warnings. Warnings, basically, you're not going to get a citation on a large chunk of our rule set. You only get a citation if you warn, or if you don't pay attention to those warnings. The vast majority of the 55 citations that were sent this year to members of West San Gabriel was because you ignored the warnings that were sent to you, okay? You get a warning and you have a 48-hour time frame to correct that issue within the multiple listing service. And if you don't correct it, you will get a citation. I hear all the time, Art, well, you didn't use an email address that I check all the time. You didn't use an email address that was correct. It is absolutely your responsibility, your agent's responsibilities to make sure that we have the absolute correct information to communicate out to you. Because as I said, the vast majority of these citations that were sent were unnecessary. If the agents were paying attention to emails coming across, it would not have been an issue. So please talk to your agents and make sure that they are doing what they need to be doing along those lines. So the next issue that, slide that we'll be talking about is what exactly occurred within your footprint. Failure to input the listing into the MLS or register the property. This all goes back to the clear cooperation policy, and I've got slides later that's going to deal about that. But we had 11 cases that were dealt with within the CRMLS footprint for West San Gabriel. Let me talk very clearly, and I'll do this in one of the upcoming slides. Know that if we receive notification from somebody that you are marketing a property that is not in the multiple listing service, we're going to shoot you an email. And you have 1 business day from the date stamp on that email to get that listing into the MLS. If you do so, you're not going to receive a fine or a citation from us. Okay? So I know that there's some significant fines when it comes to the clear cooperation policy, but we're doing everything we possibly can to communicate with you and make sure that you and your agents understand that they have an obligation to either register the property in Matrix, which means that you have a exclusion form signed, the SELM signed, or you input it into the multiple listing service. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more into depth. So we're doing everything we possibly can to communicate and not fine, but sometimes unfortunately, people are not listening. So let's talk a little bit about our general update. And basically, 2020 has been a year like no other. Hopefully, there's no disagreements from anybody on that. Let's talk a little bit about how we have persevered through that process. So COVID-19 is a reality that all of us have been dealing with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've dealt with keeping the industry moving forward for you and your agents. So one of the things that we did to deal with the pandemic was hopefully everybody's aware that the entry advisory, property entry advisory form has to be filled out prior to showing a property. And I'm going to go into a little bit of a rabbit hole here as well. But one of the things that CRMLS did is we have a relationship with Glide. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about a really huge benefit to you as agents and brokers, or to you as brokers and your agents that's coming along in regards to the Glide system. But the PEAD links have been added into all of the listings within the CRMLS footprint. And basically all that they have to do at that point is click on that link. It will fill out the form from the multiple listing service. You will fill out the client information, just exactly like you would do manually on the form, and you will submit it, give the email address for your client to sign it. They'll sign it and it'll get delivered automatically to the listing agent, okay? Really goes along the lines of making sure that there's an easy process for you to get showings done on your properties, and easy way for you as a buyer's agent to get those PEADs delivered to the selling agent. We've had 277,000 PEADs delivered through this system since the end of August when we went live with it. So recognize that we absolutely have been proud of getting that up and running, and we've got some huge enhancements coming down the road for that as well. Okay, so one of the other things that CRMLS did is that we added the additional open house capabilities within the both your Matrix and Paragon and our Flex system. Will deal with Matrix. You're seeing a screenshot of where that goes. Recognize that this is not where a virtual tour goes, okay? We're in the process of changing the name of virtual open houses to live stream open houses. Once again, this is not where, this is not where a virtual tour goes. It actually will not be submitted into the multiple listing service with a virtual tour in there. So we'll block that transmission. But it is the place where if you have a time-bound open house that you are conducting virtually, you'll be able to put that URL into the multiple listing service, okay? Very important to note, in March, at the end of March, we did take down the traditional open house options, and those will remain down until we receive communication from the governor's office and Cal OSHA. And now the California Department of Real Estate has started weighing in, saying that if people are conducting traditional open houses, they will be fined. So that will not be coming back within the CRMLS system until such point that we receive direction from the government as to whether or not open houses can still be held. We get tons of complaints from you as you and your agents in regards to open houses. Unfortunately, there's not anything that CRMLS is physically going to do. Those complaints should more naturally be delivered to the Department of Real Estate, not to CRMLS, okay? Unfortunately, we just don't have the rule set or the capabilities to enforce these regulations, but the Department of Real Estate, I know, is actively looking through those things. So I know I'm going to get questions about this at the end of the presentation, so I will not go too much more into depth. I'll just go on to my next slide. So let's see where I'm at. Okay. Next, virtual and live showings. We have given you the capabilities of doing these. And this is those time-bound events where you're going to walk somebody through a house with the phone because of the COVID concerns. You do have the capability through showing time and through our other mobile apps in order to basically walk them through that whole entire process. So I'd highly recommend that you guys take a look at all of those. The virtual open houses also are available in our 3 mobile apps, the CRMLS app, HomeSnap, and MLS Touch. So important things going along those lines in our systems. And I think it's important for you guys to take a look at those. The other piece that you guys have from a CMA standpoint is Cloud CMA does have a virtual cloud CMA live. Feel free to give us a call. If you guys have not heard this number before, 1-800-925-1425 is our tech support line. And I highly recommend that you guys take an opportunity to give us a call. So I know I'm going through this stuff fairly fast, but please bear with me as we go through it. I do want to go through the clear cooperation policy as well. And the main thing I just want to really reiterate and walk through with the brokerage community, what we're seeing and what we've done in regards to the clear cooperation policy. Coming soon, whether you love it, you hate it, or somewhere in between, we do have a coming soon status in the multiple listing service. In the coming soon status, marketing is allowed. We always get this question, you know, Art, I'm seeing people put signs up on coming soon. I'm seeing people, you know, on social media talking about their coming soons. As long as that coming soon is in the multiple listing service, they can do that. It is displayed in the MLS. It is input into the MLS as a status. Commission is offered. There's not days on market counting against it. That was one of the decisions we made, is that there's not a full marketing push on it. It's not being syndicated out through CRMLS. It's not going up on all the IDX, or it is going up on the IDX websites, but there is really not a full marketing push on it. So days on market does not count. And there's limited distribution through the MLS. So, and there is no showings on coming soon listings. If you have a property in coming soon and you are showing them, you are violating the CRMLS rules regarding coming soon. That being said, if you have a showing, you can take it out of coming soon and show the property, but recognize that coming soon, you are allowed to have it in that status for 21 days, and the system will automatically take it out of coming soon for you. Or you can manually take it out before that 21 days, but once it is taken out of coming soon, it can't go back in. There is no coming soon again, okay? It is a one-time shot for the property. It is primarily there to utilize when you have a situation where you want to get the listing under contract, but you're in a situation where there are repairs that need to be done. The property owner needs to do something. They're going to be out of town for the first 3 weeks of the listing contract. Those are some of the reasons why you would put something in coming soon, okay? It still allows you to generate that buzz, but you're not allowed to do showings at that time, okay? Let's go into the next segment of this, which is the registered piece of it. And for those of you who have done this, I know that about 50% of our agents have actually walked through the process of having an SELM and filing it with CRMLS. This is the old waiver process, okay? We still recommend that you guys get an SELM and have it signed by your seller, but you no longer have to upload that SELM to CRMLS if you are looking to waive your property from being input into the MLS. All you need to do is go into the multiple listing service and do it in Add Edit. There is a register listing contract button, and there are 5 or 6 fields, drop-down items that you have to fill out in order to input it into the system. It is not displayed. There's no marketing allowed in this status, just like there was, well, there's no marketing that is allowed in this status, and it's not displayed in the MLS. So once it's input into registered status, nobody else in the multiple listing service can see it. Okay, there's not a commission offered. There's no days on market because it's not on the MLS. There is no distribution through the MLS. It is a limited entry and showings only to the listing broker's clients. Okay, we've defined what that is, and I can answer some questions on that as we go along. I just want to make sure I get through all of my slide deck here, and we're on to my next subject, which is our training resources. I'm not going to go too much in depth. I did talk about that. Visit crmls.org/education. Please, please, please. As we're seeing a huge influx of calls from West San Gabriel as an association, we would love to get the opportunity to get in front of your agents and help them out with some of the issues that they're seeing. So real quickly go through these slides. Like I said, I can give you guys the capabilities of getting the slide deck and having you guys be able to look through all of those resources as well. Always my fear. I don't know what's going on with my computer days, guys, but I'm almost through my presentation. So the slide deck is playing around on me. So I'm just gonna get into the new product side of it and talk about LionDesk, which is one of our products that you guys have access to. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because they have a new Facebook ad portal. So you guys have the capability of popping your listings up onto Facebook. Thank God I wasn't saying something I shouldn't. Facebook, in order to generate buzz about your listing. So take a look at it. It is a very, very cool product. not going to go too much in depth. We do have training resources on our website about that as well. Builders Update is something that's not new, but we have some enhancements to that, and those enhancements really are generated around some of the capabilities and being able to see some of the builders inventory that is out there that sometimes doesn't show up on the multiple listing service. The other place that I'd like to direct you guys to is our marketplace, and our marketplace has products such as e-commission, Hurdler, Rate My Agent. Basically what the marketplace is they're not included with your fees, but we've cut deals with them to give you guys better rates than you're going to get anyplace else. So take a look at it. It is on your dashboard down at the bottom. You guys will be able to see dashboard. So when you log in, before you click on Matrix, down at the bottom, all of those products show up for you guys. So important for you guys to take a look at. This next piece, I definitely want to take a few minutes with. I know I have until 11:20 or so, and I want to give some time for some questions because I'm sure there will be. Albert can attest to this. I started at, believe it or not, there's some of you that have been around much longer than me. Not pointing at you, Seal or Lorraine, but I've been around at the CEO level since 2005 at MRMLS. You guys are very well aware of kind of the history of where we've gone and where we've been. One of my first meetings that October was with Albert Tran. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to use what was then WinForms as the entry point to the multiple listing service. It made sense to me that if you guys were entering all your information into WinForms, now ZipForms, and you guys were entering all your information into the MLS, why didn't you just have one entry point? And unfortunately at that time, ZipForms, WinForms couldn't get their arms around that whole entire process. But lo and behold, in 2020, a company called Glide, 2019, a company called Glide came along. And Glide, as you guys know, if hopefully some of you have taken advantage of the disclosure forms that you can send over to your clients. It is a TurboTax way of filling out the C.A.R. form set. And it's a very cool and slick product. You guys hopefully have seen it through the PEAD process as well. They are and have signed a deal with the California Association of Realtors to license all of C.A.R.'s form set. So every form that C.A.R. offers is going through a process of what they call glidification. And in January of this year, you guys are going to have access to a really, really cool product. CRMLS will be the first MLS in the history of California and the nation to provide the ability for agents to submit an offer directly from the MLS. So what you guys are going to see in the January-February timeframe is a purple button on the screen that says submit an offer using Glide. And what's going to happen? You are going to be launched into Glide, and as long as you have access to ZipForms, you'll be dropped into the RPA. And that RPA will be filled out with all the information that is available in the multiple listing service. You'll have to fill in the offer details, offer price, things along those lines. It will be a guided process for you. And once you go through that process, it will give you the ability to put your client's email address in there and submit it to them for their signature. And once their signature has been completed on that RPA, we'll deliver it to the selling agent. You will have a way to track whether or not that RPA has been viewed. And once the selling agent receives that RPA, they will have a tracking system to be able to share with their client, their seller, in order to compare all of the offers together on one screen and a platform to do that. And if counter offers are chosen to be delivered, the selling agent can click on a button and prepare counter offers off of all of the RPAs that they've been delivered. It is a seamless product, and I think it is a huge benefit to our members. Later on, coming in April, May, June, we don't have a tie down for that. But my dream of entry from the same platform that you guys use on your form side is going to come to fruition. So Glide is taking our entry our listing input form, and they're glidifying it. So there will be a very easy process for you guys to walk through filling out listing content off of the Glide product, and you will basically publish it to all of the listing forms that you need to fill out for that listing. And at the same time, you can click a button and publish it to the multiple listing service. You'll no longer have to do it in 2 different places. Okay, so I'm excited about this. I think it's going to be a huge benefit to our membership going forward, and we're looking forward to delivering that to you guys in the first quarter of 2020. And with that, I think I've struggled through trying to change slides in a very, very unorthodox way, and I will open it up to questions if there are any.
Thank you, Art. We have a question from Lorraine. Thank you, Art. Is the association also CC on the notice to correct? I think she was referring to when there's a violation that you send to the agent to correct an issue on the MLS or on their listing. I think that's what she's replying to.
Yeah, we have the capability of doing that. It just is you have to ask us to turn that on. Some associations don't want that capability, but that being said, some do, and we just really need to get that request out of you guys to have that piece done.
But the broker is CC on, right? The broker
yeah, absolutely. Broker and office manager if they're designated within the system.
Okay. Art, I see coming soon signs on the property. It is a loop. All the listing agents double ending their listing.
Okay, so question for you. You're seeing coming soon signs. Are they in coming soon in the multiple listing service? Are they posted in that status?
I don't know. This question is from friends. So maybe they're not on the MLS, or maybe they are. I'm not sure.
If they're on the MLS and coming soon or in active, of course, they do have the capability of doing that marketing, but they cannot show it. They cannot show it to their own clients, and they cannot have cooperating brokers show it to their clients. So if that's occurring, we do need to have reports of that from you and as the brokerage community for us.
Thank you. Question from Lane. Art, can you touch on MLS nationwide lawsuit? How does it affect our CRMLS?
So there's a number of different lawsuits going on. One of them is a little bit more in depth and is not in regards to the clear cooperation policy, and 2 of them are. And the 2 that are basically are lawsuits by organizations that have started private listing networks and say that there is an antitrust concern in regards to organizations such as CRMLS requiring that agents put their listings into our multiple listing service. We have been sued in one of them, which is the private listing service lawsuit versus Bright MLS, MRED, and CRMLS. We don't think that they have any merit. We have never told our members that they can't post their listings in other places other than the multiple listing service. But if they are going to do public marketing, they need to post it in the multiple listing service itself. So we are vigorously defending ourselves on that side, and we have put a motion to dismiss up with the court and are just waiting back for a result on that. There are 2 other lawsuits going on in the country which have to do with a buyer's incapability of negotiating a commission as part of their offer. And those are being heard in federal courts in Illinois and state court in Missouri. And both of those are in discovery right now. This case in Illinois, which is the federal case, has survived a motion to dismiss and is going on within the next year or so into a hearing on certifying class action. When it comes to federal cases and antitrust lawsuits, they have to prove that there was a class harm, and they'll be doing that. Recognize that the lawsuit that CRMLS is involved in will take a couple of years to rectify, and the case at the federal level could take anywhere between 3 to 7 years to rectify. Antitrust cases are notoriously difficult and longer term problems for the industry.
Thank you, Art. In regards to Glide, do we have a training on how to use Glide? I believe we can request, right, to have someone come and do a
Absolutely, absolutely, and recognize that what I was talking about, even though I'm so excited about it, you're gonna have to wait until February for it to come out for you guys to utilize. So C.A.R. is offering a basic make an offer platform to its members. What we have is a lot more in depth, and that integration to the multiple listing service will make it really, really meaningful. There's a lot of education that we've got to go over to make sure that buyers agents know what it is that they're doing, and that sellers agents know what it is that they're getting into as well. So, but we think it's going to be a huge improvement and a much more streamlined process for you guys to make offers, track them, and make counter offers and lead to quicker sales.
You know, as realtors, we're on the road a lot. So is Glide user friendly on the smartphone? Yeah,
they do have the capability. Most companies now, they're not going to an app-based approach. They're doing responsive programming to where it works off of whatever platform you're on. And yeah, it's a cool offering. Amy can come out and talk about that as well. Perfect, thank you. How can you control the listing agent to show it to their clients when there's a for sale site installed in the property? I think Vince is referring to the clear cooperation issue. So if we receive a report that they've shown it and we can verify it, recognize that it's a $2,500 fine for every showing that we can rectify, up to a total of $15,000. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have, I believe. Thank you, Art. Can you kind of touch on what's the outlook for 2021 for CRMLS and also in regards to Zillow and then Amazon? That's from me. Thank you. That's a loaded 30-minute long conversation. All in one little question. The prognosis for CRMLS in 2021. I think every economist that I've talked to and listened to is a little bit up in the air as to what's going to happen. What's happening next week will have a huge effect on what happens in 2021. And no matter which side of the fence you sit on, there will be effects to the election, to the economy, and to the real estate industry in 2021. So most everybody I've talked to really that's a key event that they're going to basically hold off doing any in-depth prognostication as to where things are going. CRMLS is continuing to grow. We, in your neck of the woods on Monday, Glendale Association of Realtors is coming back into the fold. There are a couple of people on the line who remember Gordon Maddock, and Gordon Maddock was part of the team that hired me at MRMLS. And Gordon told me, he said, your #1 job, Art, is to get Glendale and Pasadena back. And on Monday, I'm going to be able to shoot him an email and say, Gordon, it took me 15 years, but they're now both back into the fold. So Pasadena joined us on January 1st and Glendale November 1st. So excited for that. So we're continuing to grow. We're going to continue to refine our product offering and do everything we possibly can to make you guys successful as brokers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Art. I think that's all the questions we have, I believe. So thank you, Mr. Art Carter.
And Mindy, I saw a lot of people asking where can they contact. So brokers at crmls.org would be the best email. And then if they need to contact Art directly, that email can be forwarded to him.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw that on the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Art Carter.
Thank you guys very much
for sharing your invaluable knowledge and presentation. And also thank you, Amy. And at this time, I would like to introduce our 2020 and 2021 Vice President and our 2010 past President, Ms. Ling Chow. Take it away.
Thank you. By the way, Art, I miss you.
I miss you too, Ling.
Okay, I am very honored today to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is, we call our attorney, Jim Klinkert, is because he is our attorney for our association. Our attorney, I keep on saying our attorney. Jim works for RKG Attorney at Law. He's a leading trial counsel for RKM, abbreviation for his company. A veterans of many dozen, I'm going to read your bio, Jim, don't be embarrassed, okay? Veterans of many dozen trials. Jim has trial cases in various cells and federal forms involving such diverse area of law as public and private construction, employment title, contracts, escrow, business interference, partner and shareholder dispute, broker liability, professional malpractice, lender liability, commercial transaction, estate, elder abuse, broker and broker contract license, revocation proceeding, wrongful death, major personal injury. Jim graduated from the law school of I can't say the word today. Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and I won't say the year, and began practice law from that same year. He's a former real estate broker, and he's been active in organization real estate for more than 2 decades, many years, I guess. 2 decades is a long time, and an advisor to local associations, including ours, and a member of the California Association of Realtors, Legal Fair Forum. Outside the court, Jim is accomplished classical pianist. And it is our honor to have Jim to give us the update on Operation Legal and Safety in the COVID world, fair housing update, new laws for 2020 and beyond. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Ling. Good to see all of you virtually, of course. I think the last time I talked to all of you was back in January before the world shut down, before we had this horrible pandemic on our hands. I was given a handful of topics to consider this morning. I basically ended up settling on the ones that Ling mentioned. And as usual, there's probably way more stuff to talk about than I have time to get to. So we're going to kind of move over some of the main high points in these different areas. First thing I'd like to talk about is, let's see if I can get everything working here. There we go. Operating legally and safely in this pandemic environment we're in. And you guys have heard a lot about this, and I'm sure you have good practices going and what have you. I just wanted to review a few things, though. I want to talk about property showings and the related area of open houses. I'd like to talk for a few minutes about maintaining a physical workplace that is safe, because that's important. And then there's some interesting issues that come up in terms of visual inspections and the disclosures you make because of the world we're living in now. As far as property showings, I hope you guys are implementing good, safe practices to minimize your risk of liability. In a few minutes, I'm going to share with you some thoughts I have on potential liability for even trying to operate in the COVID-19 world and explain why some of these things are important. But as you all know, the state of California has adopted some specific rules, and C.A.R. on the heels of that has made some specific recommendations and provided a lot of materials to you. Just a few of these things: no open houses unless carefully structured. You don't want to just casually go about operating an open house. There are a lot of problems with that, as we'll get to. Showings should be virtual if possible, but if they're by appointment and physical, it should be with one buying party if at all possible. And the California Association of Realtors came out with a really good form, PEADV, that gives you a good level of protection against possible claims down the road from somebody who might think that they contracted the COVID-19 disease because of your activities. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. If you're not, you should become familiar with it, and it should be used as a normal part of your practice. All these concerns kind of hit home with me 2 or 3 months ago. I had a retired judge who was acting as an arbitrator in a binding arbitration case I had, and he assured me that if I would come physically and show up for this binding arbitration, it would be a safe environment. He had a large conference room, shouldn't be a problem. We'd all be able to socially distance. Everything should go just fine. So I went and spent the day with a bunch of other people in this room. Next day, I get an email telling me that the opposing party in that arbitration tested positive for COVID-19. So I spent a couple of nervous weeks self-quarantining, didn't get the virus, but still it was kind of a nerve-wracking thing. And every time you start thinking, gee, the worst of it is past and we're really safe again, you have some little reminder like that that comes and bites you and reminds you need to be constantly vigilant. So use that form, post the rules for the showings. So make sure you have people sign off on those and observe them. Provide hand sanitizer, sanitizing wipes, face masks, clean and disinfect, open the doors and windows if possible. I think these concepts have all been pretty much drummed into your head over and over again by now, but keep them in mind, they're important. Require your visitors to use hand sanitizers before touring property. Show properties with occupants not present if possible, and remind clients to observe social distancing rules and avoid touching handles and switches. As far as personal protective equipment goes, I remember early in the outbreak, people were really wearing gloves a lot. That's really been kind of downplayed now. People aren't doing that, but the face coverings still are an important aspect of protection and protection from you from liability. Let's talk for a few minutes about open houses. California Department of Public Health rules pretty much dictate what you're able to do and what you're not able to do in terms of showing property in open houses. And it's important that you adopt a prevention plan. Probably the best and most accessible one I've seen is the one that C.A.R. has published, the form document BPPP. It deals with mandatory government showing requirements, including best practice guidelines, and it's in your Zip Forms COVID library. What you don't want to do is have an open house that's just done on a casual basis, that's open to the public just to walk in. It's important that you have people make appointments or have a digital sign-in process so you're controlling traffic. The horror story you would have is if you have an open house sign out and the doors are open and all of a sudden instead of 1 or 2 people, you've got 6 or 8 or 10 people in the house. That's a really difficult situation to control. And it potentially is a big problem for you in terms of liability if somebody does get sick and tries to point the finger back at you and your activities. It's important that any advertising you do for an open house and any open house signs you post state that the appointments are, that the showings are by appointment only, or entry into the house is by appointment, or in the digital sign-ins are required. It's kind of an interesting possibility. There's an aspect of the Code of Ethics, Article 12, called the True Picture Test, where basically you're not supposed to be misrepresenting any of your activities as an agent. And there is some concern that an open house sign that's just unlimited and unconditional, doesn't state that appointments or digital sign-ins are required, could be viewed as a misrepresentation of what people normally expect from an open house to be. As far as the rest of the items for open houses, you should have everybody sign your form PEADV. Rules for entry should be clearly posted at the entry. Again, hand sanitizer, sanitizing wipes, and masks should clean and disinfect before and after, try to keep the doors and windows open, and avoid handing out physical promotional materials, because again, that could be something that somebody points to down the road saying, well, they're handing out all these things, other people have touched them, and I think that's where I contracted the virus. And then lastly, if you're going to have an open house, you might just want to double check and make sure there's no local city or county ordinance where you're having the open house that might interfere legally with your ability to handle the open house. Now, why is all this stuff important? Basically, liability for negligence should be a concern. I'm not aware yet of anybody, at least in my sphere of influence, who has been sued for supposedly exposing somebody to the coronavirus, but I can just about guarantee you those lawsuits are coming at some point. I can see a lot of issues with them. I think they would be difficult lawsuits to prove in many cases because of the speculative nature of where somebody might have gotten sick. But somewhere down the line, there's going to be a lawsuit like that, and your best defense against it is going to be that you followed all these guidelines, use the material C.A.R. has provided, and taken very careful steps to minimize the risk of any infection. And keep in mind, the elements of a cause of action for ordinary negligence are really simple to prove. It's the existence of a legal duty, it's the breach of that duty, and resulting in injury or damages to somebody. So all you got, and all it takes is 9 of 12 jurors to decide that you didn't exercise reasonable care under the circumstances, and you're down the road to figuring out what it's going to cost you. And the thing I always worry about in civil lawsuits these days, probably more than any other element of damage, is non-economic damages, sometimes called general damages. Those are the pain and suffering damages that people ask for in lawsuits. And the reason those are a problem is that there's really no practical limits on where a jury can run away with and go when you get into that area. I could see if somebody in the right circumstances and the right facts, somebody who's gotten sick and ended up on a ventilator, or maybe they got sick and they passed it on to some family member who got very sick and died, I can see a really strong case being made for some really large number damages. The jury instructions in California provide that non-economic damages consist of past and future physical pain, mental suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, physical impairment, inconvenience, grief, anxiety, emotional distress. All those things can be considered. And like I mentioned, there's not really much in the way of limits on those things. In some cases, a judge will step in and say, this has gone too far. What the jury came back with is crazy. I'm not going to allow it. But you don't have the statutory limits like you do, even for punitive damages, have strong limits on them based on the income and assets of the individuals being charged with them and the relationship to the actual damages. So your best protection is to exercise careful, safe practices. It's also important that you, if you're out in the world operating these days, make sure you've got good general liability business insurance coverage. It's probable that your errors and omissions coverage won't cover for things like just general things like people getting sick at a property showing and what have you. You want to look at your policies carefully, make sure whatever you've got does cover that. Another thing that kind of concerns me in this whole idea of operating in the COVID-19 world is I can see situations where the Department of Real Estate is going to point to some practice that resulted in somebody getting sick and claim that as a violation of the real estate law. Some of the accusations I've seen in recent years, the Department of Real Estate is very concerned about people who are harmed by activities, and that would extend to physical harm as well. So there's a couple of provisions in the real estate law that allow a commissioner to seek discipline against your license. One of them is that if you violated any other law that's out there to which you're subject. And I could see them claiming that violating any of the public health requirements relating to COVID-19 might also constitute a violation of the real estate law. So be careful with that. Kind of related to all these concepts is the idea of maintaining a safe workplace. I don't know how many of you actually maintain a physical workplace these days. If somebody wants to see me, it's almost impossible to get in to see me these days because my building's been officially closed since March. And we sneak in to check snail mail and do things like that. But I don't meet with people. I meet with people on Zoom video or by conference call, and that's about it these days. It's a little bit more difficult to conduct your businesses without some face-to-face contact and some meeting, and you may see the need to keep a place of business open. You want to have certainly a written workplace specific plan. If you've got an office open, you want to make sure your workers are trained in proper safe practices. You want to have some kind of a protocol in place for screening your employees. It would be a really good idea to be checking at least temperatures and things like that, and verifying with your employees upon entry that they don't have any symptoms, any problems. You want to have certainly good, safe cleaning and disinfecting protocols. And then all the usual physical distancing guidelines. I'm not going to go over them in great detail because you guys all know what they are, but basically actual distance, partitions, barriers. Limiting the number of workers at one time is a really good idea if you maintain a physical office. Staggering worker breaks is kind of an important idea to keep in mind, that will help minimize people grouping together where they could spread the virus. It's nice to have separate entry and exit routes in and out of your office. If you got a big office, directional hallways would be a really good idea, again, to minimize contact. It's recommended that you close and restrict common areas where workers would congregate typically. You don't want people hanging out around the water cooler or around the coffee machine. You want to discourage that type of thing. So you probably want to close those areas if you have a physical office. And then you want to have good signs posted, again, to protect yourself, that you've warned your workers of what to do and what not to do. Make sure that they're exercising safe practices. You certainly want to discourage your employees from carpooling together and doing things like that seemed to be so socially responsible a year ago. Now they're socially irresponsible. You want to keep people separate and apart as much as possible. Cal OSHA got involved in the safe worker place having to do with the COVID-19 virus, and they've published a publication, COVID-19 Industry Guidance for Real Estate Transactions. And C.A.R. has bootlegged on that and used quite a bit of it in their sample prevention plan for use in reopening a real estate office, which is quite detailed. If you're going to maintain an office, or if you're thinking about reopening an office that you've closed, it'd be worthwhile to review that and follow its suggestions. Your plan would need to include how to investigate and report and handle an outbreak. There are rules out there that if somebody gets sick in your workplace, you have an obligation to report that. So there can be contact tracing done, and the effect of it can be minimized. In fact, one of the new laws that was recently signed in California is SB 1159 that has to do with workers' compensation. And what it does, the normal rule in California is that a worker who thinks they've been injured on the job needs to prove it. They need to be able to show that, yes, I was injured doing something that my job called for in the line of work that I do, and here's my proof, here's how it happened. SB 1159 kind of flips that proof upside down. SB 1159 says that in many circumstances, arises a rebuttable presumption that a COVID-19 infection was work-related. I didn't include all the details here, so we could go on and talk about it for an hour, but basically there are rules in that law about, depending on the criteria have to do with the number of workers in the workplace and the number of infections that occur within a certain span of time, approximately 2 weeks. So if you're a small operation and you have 3 or 4 infections within a couple of weeks, this presumption might arise. If you're a larger office, it might take a few more infections than that. You're not going to have the rebuttable presumption arise if just one person in your office gets sick, your place of work gets sick. But for here, the problem is the risk of a workers' comp claim from an employee who becomes sick. And that's, hopefully you've all got workers' comp insurance coverage for your employees. But beyond that, there's another area of concern I have, and that's the risk of negligence liability to third parties who are not your employees. What happens if somebody who works in your workplace can establish that they contracted the coronavirus because of the practices you had implemented in your office? What if they spread that to somebody else who becomes sick? I can see a claim being made back against you for allowing that to happen. it's a foreseeable risk that some employee in your office who gets sick would go out and infect somebody else. Normally, you don't have to worry about paying for pain and suffering and that type of thing for your employees. That's all covered within workers' compensation. But a third party who interacts with one of your employees and gets sick and tries to point the finger back at you, you wouldn't have those same protections. So something to keep in mind. What are you guys doing these days about visual inspections? That can be a real problem in the COVID-19 world. As you all know, you have a duty to conduct a reasonably diligent visual inspection of accessible areas in a residential property you're marketing, and to disclose any red flags that are apparent that might suggest there are problems with the property. And there's a real conflict these days, ever since last March, between your duty to conduct that diligent visual inspection and your duty to keep yourself and others safe. What do you do if you've got a homeowner that says, I don't want my property being inspected. I don't want people inside of it. There's too great a risk of infection from the coronavirus. What do you do if your agent doesn't feel safe going into a home to conduct an inspection? Do you insist that they do it anyway, despite their concerns? What if your agent is somebody who's at risk for the virus, at peculiar risk for the virus? Or what happens in a situation where some local ordinance, there's a restriction on congregating that somehow prevents you from conducting what would normally be your normal inspection protocol? It's important, there are some workarounds you can employ. One thing that people have done, I understand, is that they have made disclosures based on what they remember from a pre-shutdown inspection of the property. That's one thing you might consider if you have a problem doing a traditional inspection. Another thing you might be able to do is actually conduct your inspection following based on a previously conducted virtual tour of the property. Then I've also heard of people actually viewing live streams of inspections being done by a contractor or property inspector and conducting their inspection that way. If you resort to one of those less traditional forms of conducting the inspection that you're required to do, it's very important that you include the details of what you actually did and what the limitations were in the disclosure you make. You don't want to fill out the TDS form and act as if you have done a normal traditional inspection if that's not what you've done. You need to disclose to whoever's viewing that exactly what you've done and why and how it was done and what the limitations are. Now let's switch gears for a little while and move on to something that it isn't directly related to COVID-19 so much, although I guess it could be. Let's talk about the fair housing, some developments in that area of the law. The big news in the fair housing arena this year is the new fair housing regulations that were finally effective. These have been proposed for the last 2 or 3 years by the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. They've gone through a number of revisions and what have you based on comments they got. Finally, earlier this year, they went effective. They were effective in January 1st. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing takes the position that they simply interpret previously existing law. I would differ with that a little bit. I think they go a little bit beyond previously existing law in various respects. Fair housing concepts in California are much broader than federal fair housing law. They extend to all protected classes, plus all people associated with those classes or perceived to be members of those classes. And the fair housing regulations, to some extent, track fair employment regulations that have been promulgated by the same department. You have a lot of potential exposure legally under the fair housing rules and under the regulations specifically. The regulations impose broad direct liability for anybody's failure to correct a discriminatory practice by an employee or agent. They also impose broad direct liability for failure to correct discriminatory practice by a third party if they had the power to correct it. So for example, if you're managing a property and you are aware of the fact that one of your tenants is sexually harassing other occupants in the property, even though that tenant isn't your employee or isn't your agent, you still may have a duty to step in and take some action to correct that. Same thing with, for another example, would be a maintenance contractor making racially insensitive remarks to your tenants. The maintenance contractor isn't your employee, it's not your agent. Under normal rules, you might think you don't have an obligation to try and control what they do, but to the extent you can control what they do, and you can by choosing to hire or fire them, you have an obligation to step in and take action to prevent that. And then lastly, you have broad vicarious liability. Do you all understand the difference between direct and vicarious liability? Direct liability, as an example, would be if you get in your car and you go out and you run into somebody and they get hurt. Vicarious liability would be if somebody working for you, your employee or your agent, gets in their car, goes out, gets in that same accident, even though you weren't anywhere close to the scene of the accident because you employed the person who got in the accident and they were acting within the course and scope of their employment, you might become vicariously liable. And under the fair housing regulations, you have broad vicarious liability, even if you didn't know about what your agent was doing. And even if your agent or your employee disregards your express orders about how you want your business to be conducted. Start moving a little bit more quickly here. I'm getting behind. There are the new housing regulations address harassment. There's two types of harassment that you need to be aware of. Quid pro quo harassment is a situation where somebody is harassing somebody, saying that they're harassing them, they want something in exchange. For example, offering reduced rent in exchange for sexual favors would be a classical example of quid pro quo harassment in the housing arena. You may remember there was a movie about 20 years ago called The Grifters, where the landlord's wife would send him down to collect the rent from the good-looking tenant in the downstairs apartment. And he'd always come back and she'd say, "Did you collect the rent?" And he said, "Well, no, she'll get it for me next month." And of course, she was paying him in a different way than through money. So that can happen. It's probably somewhat rare. The more likely situation where you're going to run into harassment in a housing situation is a hostile environment. If you're a landlord or you're a property manager and you are allowing conduct that is sufficiently severe or pervasive that it interferes with the availability, sale, use, or enjoyment of a dwelling, you have potentially a hostile environment harassment situation. One example would be a tenant running around exposing himself to other tenants. And don't laugh, I had to deal with that situation about 10 or 12 years ago. I represented the operator of a large senior citizens apartment complex, and they had a resident in his early 80s that thought it would be great sport to go around exposing himself to the younger women in the complex, some of whom were barely past their early 70s. And we had to step in and we took some action. We were able to get the family involved and squelch it before it got to be a big problem. Another example might be an agent engaging in unwanted touching of prospective tenants, or an employee telling racially insensitive jokes to tenants. You got to watch out for retaliation under the new fair housing regulations, as well as existing law, but the new housing regulations address that. You can't retaliate against a tenant for exercising their rights. For example, you can't evict a tenant who has asserted a fair housing complaint. You can't evict a tenant for requesting reasonable accommodations for a disability. You wouldn't want to go out and raise a tenant's rent because the tenant helped some other tenant exercise their rights. Be sensitive to those types of situations and watch out. The fair housing regulations deal with animals quite a bit. I know I've been out a couple times over the last few years and talked to you about fair housing considerations and the treatment of animals. And it's kind of interesting, in the new fair housing regulations, the traditional line between service animals and support animals is kind of blurry these days. As you all know, assistance animals is how the new regulations define it. And the concept of assistance animals encompasses both service animals and support animals. An assistance animal is basically any animal that's necessary as a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability. That's a pretty broad standard. In terms of service animals is trained to perform a specific task. It doesn't have to be professionally trained or certified. It includes guide dogs, signal dogs, miniature horses. Also includes animals in training. So if you're confronted with a situation where you are managing property or you're a landlord and your tenant wants to have a service animal, there's really only two questions you are allowed to ask legally. First of all, are you an individual with a disability? And secondly, what is the disability-related task the animal has been trained to perform? You can't ask for a demonstration that's going too far into the personal privacy rights of your tenant. So, support animals, on the other hand, are just, they provide emotional, cognitive, or similar support to a person with a disability. They don't have to be trained or certified. They're also known as comfort animals or emotional support animals. What's interesting in the new regulations is the way they group both support animals and comfort animals together for most purposes. Under the new regulations, all assistance animals, whether they're service animals or support animals, you can't charge pet fees or additional rent. You can't have any arbitrary breed, size, or weight restrictions. That can be a problem because there are some breeds of dogs, for example, that are viewed as being much more dangerous and posing much more of a threat than other breeds of dog. It's a no-no. You can't have any arbitrary limitations based on that. You can have reasonable restrictions be imposed on the animal. If somebody wants to let an animal run around the common area completely free and in a situation where it could cause problems for other tenants, you can impose restrictions on that, for example. You can also deny a request for a comfort animal if it poses a direct threat to health, safety, and property. But you got to be careful with that. Your determination needs to be based on reasonably recent objective evidence and not mere speculation or fear on your part as a property manager or landlord. A couple other things in the regs. Regulations recognize that an owner may have to cover the cost of any damage caused by an assistance animal. And the regs are also pretty clear that an individual tenant is allowed to have more than one assistance animal in some situations. So you can't put an unreasonable limit on the number of assistance animals somebody has. The concept of disability discrimination is encompassed within the new housing regulations as well. Mental or physical impairment or disorder or condition that limits a major life activity is the definition of a disability under the regs. That could be a physical or a mental or social activities or working that are interfered with. Or you can have somebody who's got a record of having been perceived as having a mental or physical disability. And the disability can be permanent or temporary. And where this comes into your lives as landlords or property managers is that somewhere along the line, you are going to be confronted with a request for reasonable accommodations for a tenant's disability. And those reasonable accommodations might be financial accommodations, such as fee waivers or allowing a cosigner on a lease. It could be physical accommodations, such as a preferred parking assignment for somebody who has mobility issues, or the addition of fixtures within a unit to help a disabled person get by. A request for reasonable accommodations can be made at any time, even in the midst of an eviction proceeding. And if you're confronted with a request like that, it's important that you handle it carefully to avoid getting into problems in terms of liability under the housing rules. The request must be kept confidential. You can only share it with people who are going to be directly involved with making decisions about what the requesting party wants. And something to keep in mind is that there's no particular format is required or can be demanded for a reasonable accommodation request. You might have one of your tenants mention in passing that they would really need to have something done on their property to help them with something, even though it's not a formal written request or anything like that. You still have to take it seriously. There's really only two safe ways you can respond to a request for reasonable accommodations up front. You could say yes if it's something that's obvious and kind of a no-brainer that it would be easy to do. You almost never want to say no initially. If you can't grant the request immediately, you need to then enter into what is called an interactive process with your tenant. And as I mentioned, rarely is no an appropriate answer initially to a request for accommodations. What you need to do as part of the interactive process is if you can't grant a request, you need to explore with your tenant if there's some other accommodation that might work instead. You need to be prompt in responding to requests, because if you delay, that could be viewed as a denial. If the requested information is not provided immediately, but it's provided later, you have to reconsider the request at that time. And it's unlawful to charge a fee for considering or granting a reasonable accommodation request. There's a strong policy reflected in the housing regulations that the interactive process not be any more intrusive into your tenant's privacy than is absolutely necessary. So for that reason, if you got a situation where a tenant has a disability that is known or readily apparent, and it's also known how the requested accommodation can help, you can't request additional information. You've got enough information to respond to the request, and your intrusion into your tenant's personal life has to stop there. Likewise, if the necessity for an accommodation is established by the information that the tenant provides right up front, you can't request additional information. If it's not so clear that your tenant has a disability, or it's not so clear how the reasonable accommodation requested would apply to the disability, it's okay to ask for additional information, but only so much as is necessary to establish the existence of the disability, or describe the needed accommodation, or show how the accommodation is necessary in relation to the disability. And that necessity can be documented by any reliable third party in a position to know about the person's disability. Can you deny a request for a reasonable accommodation? Yes. Here are a few reasons why you can do that. First of all, the requesting party isn't disabled. If you've observed your person who claims they need a ramp for their wheelchair, if you've observed them running laps around the parking lot in the common area, that would probably be a good reason to deny a request for a reasonable accommodation. Or if the disability-related need for the accommodation isn't apparent. If somebody tells you that they suffer from mood swings and manic depression, and they need gold-plated fixtures in their bathroom in the apartment you rent them, that would not be a disability-related need that can be addressed by the requested accommodation. You can also deny a request if it would fundamentally, if it would impose an undue financial or administrative burden. For example, if somebody wanted you to install an escalator or an elevator that would cost a six-figure sum of money, it's probably a reasonable reason not to grant that request, the amount of money involved. If it would fundamentally alter your services in the project, such as perhaps one of your tenants wants to establish a shopping van or something that will take them into town to do shopping. If you don't normally provide that service, you'd be justified in saying no to it. The new housing regulations address the extent to which you can inquire into a prospective tenant's prior criminal history info. And the important concept there is that you can no longer have any kind of a blanket ban on renting to a person with criminal history. You can't say anybody who's ever been convicted of a crime can't be a tenant in my property. It's okay to have a policy that combines a bright line rule for certain types of convictions. The obvious one, for example, if you're a landlord or property manager, would be arson. You don't want somebody who goes around lighting fires being a tenant in your property. You can't consider an arrest that didn't result in a conviction, and you can't consider a conviction that's been sealed or expunged. And basically, you can only deny housing if a specific crime poses a demonstrated risk to other residents or the property based on objective evidence. I'm going to move along a little more quickly here. I'm running out of time. Fair housing regulations also address they address a number of things. What they really don't address are still a number of things that we were hoping we'd get more guidance on. We were hoping these regulations in their final form would get a little bit more into detail about nuisances as unreasonable accommodations. We were hoping for a little bit more guidance on occupancy limits, which are still open-ended. The rule always used to be kind of the guideline was 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 additional person. That's kind of been out for some time now, but there isn't really good guidance in the regulations as to what is acceptable. There's no real safe harbor. Cost of accommodations, the cost of restoring property after accommodations, obligations to pay for common area accommodations. Those are all things that we'd like to see in the regulations and moving forward in the future, but they're not all there now. What do you do if you have conflicting disabilities that need to be addressed? What if somebody needs to have a comfort animal for an emotional disorder, but another tenant living next door has allergies to that type of animal? That's not addressed very well. And then lastly, just definitions and limitations altogether on comfort animals is kind of a wide open area still. There's a couple of other new housing related discrimination laws you need to be aware of. Since the first of the year, you can no longer discriminate against somebody on the basis of their veteran or military status. Veteran and military status is now one of the protected classes in California. And also source of income protection now extends to Section 8 housing vouchers. That's been the case since the first of the year, so you can no longer refuse to consider an applicant who wants to use a Section 8 voucher. Now, I'm going to have to move fairly quickly through what I've got left here. As far as I wanted to have a whole section on new laws, and I thought, well, gee, really the new laws that are important for everybody are the new laws related to landlord-tenant situations. And as you all know, for about the last 10 months, if you are a landlord or you manage property for somebody else, we've had a crazy time on our hands. You know, it started basically the last 10 months are just been a crazy, dizzying journey. And the chronology I've got set out here. Back at the beginning of the year, the California Tenant Protection Act of 2019 went into effect. That's statewide rent control, but it wasn't as much of a problem as many people feared. A lot of properties were accepted from it. It tended not to affect at all the mom and pop landlords and what have you. So we were adjusting to that pretty well when the pandemic hit. And back on March 16th, our governor signed Executive Order N2820, which empowered local jurisdictions to adopt eviction moratoria. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Right on the heels of that, various local cities and counties got into the game, and they did adopt moratoria on evictions, imposed a number of limitations on your ability to deal with a tenant who isn't paying rent or doing something else that's a problem. Still back in March, on the 27th of March, federal legislation, the C.A.R.S. Act went into effect. That provides tenants of certain federally related housing projects protection against evictions. The big thing that happened in terms of my ability as a lawyer to help landlords out with tenants who aren't paying their rent was on April 6th. The California Judicial Council issued an order that essentially said that courts are not allowed to issue summons in an unlawful detainer case. That's almost like having a car that's got a wonderful engine, a wonderful transmission, it's full of gas, it's all ready to go, but you don't have the keys. So you can have done everything right. You can give a 3-day notice to quit to a tenant, you can file the unlawful detainer complaint, you can do all these things, but if the clerk is not allowed to issue a summons on your eviction action, you can't get anywhere with it. Then more recently, on August 31st, the COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act of 2020 went into effect. That was AB 3088. That's still driving those of us who practice in the area of landlord-tenant law somewhat nuts with some of its requirements. We'll touch on them briefly. And then the most recent thing that happened on September 4th, 2020, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta issued an order that was a temporary halt in residential evictions. There's a lot of confusion about that, as we'll talk about in a minute. In fact, our governor came out and said, well, that really doesn't apply in California because our restrictions are more stringent, and he's wrong. In some situations, that CDC order is in effect, and you've got to be aware of it if you manage property or you're a landlord. So I think we're all familiar with the statewide rent control law that went into effect. Limited statewide rent control, rent cap of 5% plus inflation, limitation on the number of times you can increase rent within a 12-month period. And to give teeth to those limitations, they have a just cause eviction requirement. You can only evict for just cause, and there's basically 15 just cause reasons. 4 of those are no-fault reasons that require the payment of a relocation fee equal to 1 month's rent. Any more stringent local rent control laws still apply, and exclusions or single-family residence is not owned by a corporation or real estate investment trust, new construction within the last 15 years, or owner-occupied duplexes. Those are the main exceptions. Let's talk for just a quick minute about California's executive order that I mentioned. Had a kind of a unique approach to empowering local cities and counties to adopt eviction limitations. It did that by suspending any provision of state law that would interfere with the city or county's exercise of its police power to impose limitations on residential or commercial evictions. And it applied only to evictions for non-payment of rent or foreclosures for foreclosures arising out of a documented substantial decrease in household or business income. So we had that on our hands. And that's still in effect to some extent by virtue of the local rules and regulations that have been adopted pursuant to it. Basically, the governor said, cities and counties, you can do it, and they went out and did it. Counties and cities throughout the state jumped on the bandwagon and adopted all kinds of limitations. LA County's limitation is an example. I've got a bunch of things in here that have to do with their ordinance, which is kind of typical. Their LA County's ordinance applies both to residential and commercial. Any notice to terminate is null and void during the effectiveness of the moratorium. Lease terms are automatically extended until the end of the moratorium. That's causing a big problem for me with one of my files right now, because I could easily get rid of this non-paying tenant because his lease is over, but I can't because his lease isn't over because of the LA County ordinance. So that's part of it. You can't evict for any no-fault reason unless necessary to protect the health and safety of occupants. And basically, under the LA County rule, residential tenants have 12 months to repay after the moratorium ends, and you can't charge late fees, interest, penalties, or interest. The CARES Act, I'm going to mention just very briefly, it applies only to certain federally related situations, which is actually quite broad, though, because those federally related tenancies would have to do with federal rental assistance, federal subsidized housing, rental homes with federally backed mortgages. The reason I don't need to talk too much more about that is that it's over. It was in effect on March 27th. It expired on July 24th, essentially. It prevented evictions for non-payment of rent during that period of time. But since we're past it now, it's more interesting from a historical perspective. Likewise, the Judicial Council emergency rule I mentioned, where the courts aren't empowered to issue summons. That was a big deal for the better part of 4 months, 5 months, but that's over. It expired on September 1. And basically the fact that that rule was expiring is what caused our legislature to hurry up and enact COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act of 2020. The governor and the legislators knew that all the protection was ending from the Judicial Council, and if they didn't step in and do something, there were going to be a lot of additional people on the streets real fast. So they adopted this law. It is residential only. It has no application to commercial or industrial or non-residential tenancies. It provides that the local moratoriums in effect from cities and counties stay in effect until they expire, but not for any renewal period. And it prohibited any unlawful detainer evictions before October 5th. We're past that now, but we're still into this bizarre world of the types of notice we have to give. All landlords who had tenants who hadn't paid rent between March 1 and August 31st were required to give an informational notice about the new law to tenants who missed a payment during that period. The landlord cannot evict a tenant for non-payment of rent that came due between March 1st and August 31st if the tenant provides a declaration that their finances were negatively affected by the coronavirus. And then for tenants who haven't paid rent that came due between September 1st and January 31st of next year, you can't evict them if the tenant provides a declaration that their finances were negatively affected by the coronavirus. And if by January 31st, the tenant pays 25% of the back rental payments that are missed between September 1st and January 31st. And then finally, as to unpaid rent between March and the end of this coming January, landlords can collect that in small claims courts starting on March 1st. And without regard to the normal limits of $10,000 that would apply to small claims actions. I mentioned the CDC order and how the governor said that they don't have to worry about it because it doesn't apply in California. Well, it does in some situations. They're kind of few and far between. Unlike our current law in California, the CDC order applies to missed rent payments even before the onset of the shutdown back in March. So if you have a situation where payments were missed before March, still could apply. there's a different criteria. There's a declaration that the tenant has to provide you with. It requires different statements and different allegations by the tenant. They have to swear that not only were they affected economically by the coronavirus, but that it's likely they will be rendered homeless if they end up out on the street if they're evicted. There's a few additional bells and whistles like that. And the reason it's important, don't put that completely out of your mind and think it doesn't apply in California. If you're presented with a declaration under the CDC order by a tenant, you need to take it seriously and evaluate it, because the penalties for violation of the CDC order are enormous potentially. There's provision for a $100,000 fine if you give somebody a 3-day notice and they were covered by the CDC order and you didn't pay attention to that fact. You can also spend a year in jail. I mean, hopefully we never get to that kind of ridiculous stuff. But anyway, that CDC order is out there. It's still in effect. If you are presented with a request under that order from a tenant, take it seriously. So where does that get us? Just a few thoughts moving forward. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we all do business. The fact that I'm sitting here several miles away from all of you is testament to that fact. I think all of us have learned that we can do a lot more telecommuting and what have you than we thought we could. One thing that you may have all run across, and it certainly impacts my life every day, is that the court system is seriously screwed up and is likely to remain seriously screwed up, probably for at least another year, year and a half. There's a huge backlog of civil cases that simply aren't getting out to trial because the courts can't manage the coronavirus safety requirements and integrate that and reconcile those with getting cases tried. So that's likely to go on. My trial calendar is getting more and more clogged up with stuff on calendar for next year, but a lot of that stuff isn't going to happen either. So I'll probably be impacted, and people involved in the civil litigation process will probably be impacted well into 2022 would be my guess. Then lastly, I always try to avoid discussing politics when I talk, but one of the things that's going to probably affect your business for better or worse is who wins the election this coming Tuesday or whenever it's decided. For the best example of that I can think of is probably the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. For those of you familiar with that law, you remember the last big recession problem we had back around 2008, 2009. On the heels of that, there was a law enacted, a federal law called the Dodd-Frank Act. And it had to do with regulation of financial institutions, and the intent was to protect people from being harmed by future problems like the problem we had with the whole mortgage bailout situation. Part of that law was the creation of a new agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was charged with enforcing various consumer laws related to real estate and areas related to real estate, such as RESPA. And sounded like a good idea at the time, but the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in a lot of people's viewpoints, kind of went off the rails pretty quickly. They were out there, they were so aggressive there in their enforcement of the RESPA rules, for example, that policies and practices that had already been sanctioned by Housing and Urban Development, by HUD, as being acceptable, CFPB wasn't accepting those, and they were launching huge investigations, taking enforcement action, imposing huge fines and penalties. It was a real problem. And then the last election happened, and the deregulation that occurred following that election extended to the CFPB. And all of the bad things that people were worried about with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau basically kind of went into the background. The agency still exists. In fact, there was a US Supreme Court decision a few months ago that says, yes, the agency still exists, but the president has the ability to fire the director. So basically, it was really, a lot of its powers were kind of taken away from it over the last few years. Depending on what happens Tuesday, I would expect that trend to continue, or on the other hand, that those very strong enforcement policies could be back in effect very, very quickly. So depending on your viewpoint and your personal views, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what happens and how it affects us. So that's pretty much what I've got. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you.
Thank you, Jim, to pack so much information in a very short time.
I've been talking really fast for the last 45 minutes.
I noticed there's so many good information here. I don't know everybody could absorb. There's only one question from Claudia Garcia. She's asking where can we find the article that state all those guidelines so we can show our seller. Some sellers are not quite satisfied by us just verbalizing our guidelines.
Oh,
I know
gosh.
that C.A.R. has some, but I don't know where else.
I think that's mainly kind of what I drew on to get my thoughts together for what I talked about this morning. I think that BPPP document, it's not a form, it's CAR document BPPP. It's got a date of June 2, 2020. I can show you the front page of it sitting here right in front of me.
Okay.
But, I think that would be a really good thing to show the people you're doing business with. And it's actually quite detailed. It goes on, I'm looking at it here. It's 5 pages long. So there's a lot of good information in that. That would probably be a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, CAR.org has a lot of information regarding all the COVID rules and guidelines.
Yeah,
Phil is asking, does these rules applies to mom and pop back houses?
To mom and pop what houses? I'm sorry.
Back houses. I think she's talking about ADU or something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think there's any distinction. I obviously that's actually a good question, because the ability of local cities and counties to restrict accessory dwelling units was pretty much abolished a year ago. But I think still these health and safety concerns would apply. I don't think that would be viewed as somehow being in violation of the rules allowing ADUs.
Okay. I know that you touch on the fair housing. This is one of the biggest things at C.A.R. and A.R. right now. You have anything to add before we close?
I don't think so.
It's crazy right now.
We could probably spend a whole day on those new regulations and the concepts that they embody. But I touched on some of the high points. Just it's always important, even though all of our attention is focused on staying alive and keeping those around us alive and safe. You still have to keep in mind that there are these other laws that still are out there, and we need to observe them as well. So
we probably have to give you a whole day session.
That's right. That's right.
Instead of 40 minutes or 35 minutes.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to share with us before we end the session?
I don't think so. Just thank you very much for having me. It was good to see all of you, even though I don't see all of you. I know you're out there, and it's good to connect with you this way. And I look forward to, hopefully this will all be over soon, and I'll be back in person and we can all interact in the normal way.
Oh, and I'm so glad you didn't catch the COVID. Okay, that ends our presentation for Jim Klinkert. Pauline, take it away. It's your ending. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. Great. What a wonderful section for Mr. Jim Klinkert. You give us so much update, and great. We want to thank you very much for our speaker, for our attorney, Mr. Jim Klinkert, and for Miss Amy Uyoa Zunica, and Mr. R. Carter from CRMLS, and Mr. Sanjay Wagle from C.A.R. Governmental Affairs. We did learn a lot and get a lot of updates. And thank you for your fabulous speech and presentation to us today. I also want to thank Mindy Ye, our 2020 President, Lin Chao, our 2020 Vice President, and our 2010 Past President, Now Wang, 2014 Past President, and our AE, Albert Train, Ms. Fong Tang, our Education Manager, for your great help for this wonderful broker symposium. A quick reminder, please submit the nomination for 2020 Realtor of the Year, Affiliate of the Year, Good Neighbor, and the Distinguished Service Award to WSGVR Awards Committee by next Monday, right? Next Monday, November 2nd. And the second reminder is to fall back 1 hour tomorrow night before you sleep for the daylight saving times ends. And thank you all joining today's Broker Symposium. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, November 3rd at 11 for our next great class, Staying Out of the Court by Robert Braint. We thank you and we see you soon. Thank you.